a few questions, and I'll start with you, Chairman Smith, if I may. Obviously, the legislation before us today isn't the Limit, Save, and Grow Act, which we passed, but is it fair to say that this legislation embodies some of the key principles in that legislation? And if so, could you describe some of the ways in which that's true?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Under the Limit, Save, Grow Act, for example, we had provisions to lift people out of poverty. And those provisions, a lot of them still remain in this legislation. For example, TANF, the reforms that we did to TANF are the most substantial reforms that TANF has seen in more than 2 decades. And I would like to reiterate that, in fact, our committee on March 29th held a hearing about TANF reforms and work requirements. So in regards to the Ways and Means jurisdiction and work requirements, we held a hearing on March 29th. And when you look at some of the reforms on TANF here, I said it was the most substantial in more than 2 decades. Part of, whenever you're looking at the provisions of TANF, you see states are supposed to meet a 50% work participation rate. Right now, we know that 34 states have a 0% work participation rate, and 57% of TANF recipients are not engaged in work. This final bill keeps our policies from the Limit, Save, Grow Act to reset the baseline for calculating the rate and prohibiting states from gaming the system through small check schemes. This bill also keeps a provision to require the Department of Health and Human Services to report work outcomes. We fought to keep these important measures to restore accountability and make sure states are engaging people to find work and climb out of poverty. In regards to the IRS, the Fiscal Responsibility Act echoes the call on the Limit, Save, Grow Act to roll back Biden's plan to massively expand the IRS. The Ways and Means Committee asked for the plan from the IRS of how that they would spend the $80 billion. And in that plan, they called for using $1.4 billion to increase in hiring IRS agents. Our bill in this proposal eliminates that $1.4 billion for this year, which will only help safeguard working class families, that they won't see an increase of audits. In fact, it has been projected that under the IRS expansion of $80 billion, you would see 600,000 more audits on people making less than $75,000 a year. In regards to the rescissions in this bill, $29 billion. This is the largest rescissions bill that could be signed into law if this is passed. That's pretty substantial. 1/5 of the pages of this bill solely eliminates programs. That is a huge victory. And so you could go line by line. I would say that the provision that is actually Representative Massey's provision in putting where if you don't pass all 12 of the appropriations bills by the end of the fiscal year, it would put in a CR, cutting 1% in place, is transformational and huge. This bill will cut spending next year of what it currently is this year. That is something that Congress does very, very rarely. And so I think it's a big win.
2 other quick questions. Have any of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the House yet voted to raise the debt ceiling?
You know, in fact, not one Democrat in the House or the Senate has voted to make sure our country does not default to this Congress. Only Republicans have voted to make sure our country does not default.
And has the Democratic Senate even produced a plan to raise the debt ceiling?
No, and they can't muster the plans. You know, the blank check debt limit increase that has been asked by the president prior to this agreement. If the United States Senate could pass it, they would, but they can't even get 51 votes in their body to pass it. So the only proposal that has been passed by anybody is the Limit, Save, Grow Act, which was solely with Republican votes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Estes, let me go to you next, if I may. Are there any mechanisms in the Fiscal Responsibility Act that would prevent Congress from raising spending caps?
Yes. There is hard caps on fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. Not only do we see a reduction in spending from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24, but then those are capped going forward into fiscal year 25 that only have a 1% increase in the subsequent year. And then for the next 6 years beyond that, it's also requirements that it be capped at 1% as well moving forward, so that future Congresses know that's the direction that we wanted to go to limit that spending.
Thank you very much. With that, I'll go to my good friend, the ranking member, for any questions he cares to pose to the panel.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield to Ms. Scanlon to ask questions first, and I will go at the end.
That's certainly fine. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania.